All right, let's talk about a writer who didn't just report on the story, he became the story. A guy who believed the only truth worth a damn was the one you had to live, bleed for, and then wrestle onto the page with everything you had. We're talking about the one and only Hunter S. Thompson, and today we're cracking open his personal playbook for turning pure, uncut chaos into legendary art. This is the Thompson Code. Let's get into it.
And this quote, this is the key that unlocks everything. See, Thompson was absolutely convinced that the real story, the raw, high-octane truth, it doesn't happen in some sterile office or at a press conference. No way. It happens out there, on the jagged edges of the world, long after everyone else is clocked out. It lives in the howl of an engine, in the thick tension of a dangerous room. And to get that truth, you gotta be there, breathing that same weird air. So I want you to picture this. The year is 1965. America is just a total pressure cooker. It's teetering on the edge between the old, buttoned-up post-war world and this radical new consciousness that's bubbling up from below. The whole country is cracking apart over Vietnam, civil rights, and a counterculture that's questioning every single rule. And right in the middle of that storm, one journalist was about to light a match. And this is where it all kicks off. The year is 1965. Hunter S. Thompson, a freelance journalist who is basically broke and desperate for a big break, is riding deep inside the notorious Hells Angels motorcycle gang. And I mean deep. He's not just taking notes from the sideline. He's on a bike with them, drinking in their bars, and living their life of violence, brotherhood, and this wild, untamed freedom. He was in a world no outsider was ever supposed to see. And right away, he runs into this huge problem, the one that would define his entire career. The old rules of journalism, stay detached, be objective, be a fly on the wall, totally useless here. I mean, how do you objectively describe the feeling of a punch to the gut in a bar fight, or the terrifying roar of 100 Harleys starting up at once? You just can't. The tools he was taught to use were completely obsolete. So he made a choice. He realized the only way to tell this story for real was to just burn the rulebook. He had to stop pretending to be a reporter and actually become a character. He threw journalistic distance right out the window and replaced it with this radical, all-in subjectivity. He decided that the only real truth was his own experience of the chaos. To explain it, he had to become part of it. And that, right there, was the birth of his code. But an idea this radical doesn't just pop out of nowhere. It wasn't some sudden flash of genius. Oh no. It was forged in a lifetime of rebellion, constant rejection, and a relentless, almost obsessive self-education. To really get the Thompson Code, you have to understand the guy who built it from the wreckage of his own life. And this is where you see the crazy contradiction that was Hunter S. Thompson. On one hand, his life was pure chaos. Early rebellion that landed him in jail, constantly broke and on the edge of ruin with a mountain of rejection letters to prove it. But on the other hand, his mind was a fortress of discipline. This was a guy who would sit for hours and retype word-for-word masterpieces like The Great Gatsby. Not to steal anything, but to actually feel the rhythm of great writing in his bones, to internalize the very DNA of a perfect sentence. And this is the key right here. His chaotic life wasn't a bug. It was a feature. It was his laboratory. He leaned into it, used it as a testing ground. Every wild party, every dead-end job, every moment of pure desperation was just raw material. It was all data to be collected, analyzed, and then filtered through the razor-sharp mesh of his literary discipline. He was mastering the art of living on the absolute edge and then channeling that raw energy into classic, structured writing. And from this wild mix of a chaotic life and a super-disciplined mind, a real philosophy started to take shape. A whole new way of seeing the world and writing about it. This is the heart of the Thompson Code. The very first rule of the code is basically a Molotov cocktail thrown right at the heart of old-school journalism. Objectivity is a complete and total lie. Thompson argued that every single writer has a bias. Every story is filtered through someone's brain. So this whole pretense of being an invisible, impartial observer, to him, that was the most dishonest thing a writer could do. So instead of hiding his bias, he weaponized it. He made his own consciousness, his raw emotions, his unfiltered thoughts, the engine of the story. That, he believed, was the only way to a truth you could actually feel. And he gave it a name, Gonzo Journalism. Now, this isn't just writing in the first person. No, this is a full-on hostile takeover of the narrative.
The reporter becomes the main character, and often the most unhinged character at that. Their personal journey, their fears, their paranoia, that becomes the lens we see everything through. The fourth wall isn't just broken, it's completely vaporized.
So his code really breaks down into 3 core pillars. First, the Immersive Witness Mandate. You don't get to watch from the cheap seats. You have to dive in head first and put yourself right at the center of the action, no matter how dangerous it gets. Second, the maximum sensory overload rule. You don't just report the facts, you crank the volume to 11. Use wild, hallucinatory language to make the reader feel the frenzy in their own gut. And third, and this is crucial, systematic persona control. That wild, drug-fueled Dr. Gonzo character, that wasn't an accident. It was a calculated performance, a character he controlled to provoke reactions and build the legend.
So we've got the philosophy, which is pretty wild. But a philosophy is just talk without a system to actually make it happen. And this is where you see Thompson's real genius, in the methodical, almost obsessive systems he used to turn all that raw, chaotic experience into powerful art. He basically had 2 core routines that were the engine room for everything. First was that literary imitation protocol we talked about. Again, these weren't just typing drills, they were marathon sessions meant to literally hardwire the architecture of great writing into his brain until it was pure instinct. He was building muscle memory for powerful sentences. Second, his life was a constant mental laboratory. The man was never off the clock. Notebooks and tape recorders were always running, capturing every little scrap of dialogue, every fleeting thought, saving up all that raw fuel for his literary fire. And that was his secret weapon. It was never just about being wild for the sake of it. It was about having a bulletproof system to take that wildness and forge it into something structured, something powerful. The notebook captured the lightning, and the literary discipline built the bottle to hold it. The madness you read on the page, it was the end product of a relentless, methodical process. The chaos was always, always under his control. So, what's the end result of all this? Of this radical philosophy and these ironclad systems? Well, the result was nothing less than the complete reinvention of American journalism and the creation of a legend that will probably live forever. You can really track his whole journey right here. In the 1960s, he's a struggling misfit, just an outsider trying to get noticed. Then, by the 1970s, with absolute bombshells like Hell's Angels and Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, he becomes the undisputed Gonzo pioneer. You couldn't ignore him. And from the 80s on, he transcended writing altogether. He became a global cultural myth, a symbol of rebellion whose persona was as famous as his prose. His legacy is just baked into the DNA of modern writing now. He dragged Gonzo out from the fringes and made it a legitimate art form through sheer talent and force of will. He kicked the door wide open for writers to put themselves at the center of their stories, something we see everywhere today from memoirs to blogs. He basically gave a whole generation of writers permission to trust their own raw, subjective gut feelings as a valid way to find the truth. And in the end, he proved that if you fuse that radical honesty with incredible craft, you can become immortal. And that's what the Thompson Code really leaves us with, right? A question that cuts right to the bone. And it's not just about writing. It's about how you live your life. What's the story you are actually willing to become? What truth matters so much to you that you're willing to step inside it and live it from the inside out? So the lesson from the Thompson Code is pretty clear. Embrace risk, because that's where the real story always is. Throw out the safe, comfortable idea of neutrality because it's an illusion. And then find your own system for taking the beautiful, messy, unpredictable chaos of your own life and forging it into something strong, something true, something that's gonna last. When you boil it all down, Hunter S. Thompson built his legend on one profound truth, that real authenticity requires real risk. His code gave us a blueprint to live the story, then write the legend, by diving headfirst into life and then channeling it all through disciplined literary architecture. It reminds us of a rule that never changes. The highest form of authenticity creates its own legend.